So hello everyone, my name is Goran Rizalf. I am the program manager at Metamorphosis Foundation for the Media for Democracy program. And today we have a guest from the UK, Dr.Sem Power, who is a lecturer in politics at the University of Bristol. And he is also an expert on election financing, as I said, from the United Kingdom. Welcome.
Thank you.
So these couple of days you had a chance to attend this conference about state financing of election campaigns here in North Macedonia. And you could hear different opinions from experts from the country and from abroad. So can you tell us what are the pros and cons of receiving budget funding for elections, especially when most of the money go to the media?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So state financing has many benefits. The idea behind state financing is that it is an investment in democracy from the state. And, democracy is quite a precious thing. And to recognize it as something that you levy a tax for means that you, as a society, are buying into democracy. In the same way in which you are, buying into healthcare or buying into the arts, it's seen as a public good. And so state financing in many ways is a really important way of buying into the democratic process in both a literal sense and in a sort of philosophical sense as well. And the problem, of course, with state financing is that it's a tax. So it is something that you are taking from the public. So you need to be very careful with the way in which you raise that tax, and you need to make sure that you do it in such a way that is equitable. And what we've seen in many countries that raise their state that raise the fund politics through the state, and it's most countries in Europe, apart from the UK, I should say, but I'll get onto that. Is that what you need to do is raise it in such a way that is equitable, so that it doesn't seem like it's just something that benefits the established parties, because the citizens can quite quickly move from a position of, I buy into the system and my taxes pay for parties and that is good, democracy is good, to why are my taxes only going to benefit the largest parties and the largest opposition parties and not benefiting democracy in a much more general sense. That's the picture that we see broadly when we think about state financing. And also, I think, given that it's a general picture, what we see in North Macedonia as well.
Yes, exactly. This is what the analysis has shown, that most of the funds go through the largest, coalitions of political parties. But I wanted to ask you, what about when these money go for election campaigns in the online media sphere? Here, for example, there is not much regulation when it comes to online websites that are part of the election campaign, and they receive a decent amount of funding, let's say. So, what is your experience? Should these news outlets receive direct funding from the state when it comes to elections? Should this be regulated in a way?
So generally, one thing that we know is that no country really anywhere has got a handle, whether it's through private financing or whether it's through state financing, on developments with regards to online campaigning. Across the world, it's something that we're still trying to understand. And also, we're still trying to understand how to regulate. There's countries which are slightly further ahead. The EU has introduced some quite interesting legislation, Ireland and Canada, but really there's no country that's got it quite right or quite understands it. And the particular situation in North Macedonia is very interesting because, again, generally one way in which we do introduce state financing in countries is through the provision of some kind of media. So even in a country like the United Kingdom, where we don't have much state financing, we provide free slots on television to political parties. Lots of countries provide a certain amount of free media. It's what we call indirect state financing. very few countries, like in North Macedonia, have this system where you have online portals, if you will, or internet portals that are funded via the state, and then it's almost as an intermediary. And even so it's an incredibly unique situation. And as we might get onto, perhaps not a situation which is, given that it's unique, that there's much justification for. Moving beyond that, what we see, if you have that situation, what you need is for it to be regulated very, very carefully. And in the report that the report that we've written, and that was very clear over the past few days, is that there is nobody in charge of regulating these online portals, be it the State Electoral Commission, be it the SPCP, be it the Audio Media Visual Service. Any of these regulatory institutions don't have the power to regulate these online portals, and that's a problem. If you have a system, it needs to be regulated. I come back to the example of football. You can't play a football game without a referee and expect everyone to play fairly. You need a referee in charge. So if you don't have a referee in charge, that's where the problems start. So at the very least, if you have this system, which is somewhat unique, you need someone to regulate it to ensure that people are playing by the rules.
Yes, it's interesting because, for example, the TV stations and the radios and the print media, they are regulated when it comes to election financing. So they are part of the whole system, but they are regulated. And to be honest, most of the funding goes for the media goes to the television stations. So it's just a small amount goes to the online news sites, although this is not an insignificant amount. Yeah, but I wanted to ask, when we talk about election campaigns, we know that a lot of state money, budget money are spent. Do you think that these election campaigns actually make a difference? Do people tend to decide who to vote for based on the campaign just before the elections?
It's the, I suppose, what they call in the USA the $1 million question, right? Do election campaigns matter? And if they do, in what way do they matter? I think certainly campaigns do make a difference. One of the problems in sort of proving this is that it's very hard to find the hypothetical, to find the campaign where nobody campaigned. So whether it made a difference, it's very hard to disprove it. But we have found ways to do so. One thing we can look at is whether advertising matters. And the one thing that we know about advertising, since we're talking about these online portals, is that you can advertise as much as you like, but it has somewhat diminishing returns. An advert, you can bombard somebody, but eventually they're going to have got the message, and you can start wasting money. And you can also do it a bit too early. I like to use the example of pizza, right? If I see an advert for a pizza for Domino's or any kind of pizza organization on TV, I might want a pizza and I might order a pizza that night. And if I see an advert for a pizza company, very rarely will I think, oh, in 60 days' time, I'm going to buy a pizza. And it's the same thing for politics. You quite often you make up your mind quite late. People like me are very engaged with politics. I'm not normal in many ways, but particularly in this instance. So actually, what we need to think about is much more of normal people and political advertising as like the pizza. It makes a difference when people are thinking about it, which tends to be as the election is coming up. So even money spent 20 days up to in the electoral period doesn't make much of a difference. The other thing with campaigns that we do know from some evidence that people have is that very traditional means of campaigning tend to make more difference to people. So if you speak to somebody, if you give them a leaflet, these things do tend to be slightly more effective than just targeting an ad on Facebook or something, because there's that personal touch. And people have tested this by, certainly in the olden days, I think you struggled to get it past an ethics review board or something now as an academic, but they persuaded parties to campaign in one tower block. and not in another tower block, for example, in the same district. And they found that if you campaign in one tower block, that tower block goes out and votes, and you can get out the vote slightly more effectively. So campaigns certainly matter. So for any campaigners watching, you are doing good work. It's worth doing, but you need to be slightly tactical about it. The adverts have diminishing returns, and you're probably more likely to be able to get someone to go out and vote. You might be less likely to persuade them to vote in the way that you want, and you might have to talk to them if you want to persuade them to vote in a certain way.
Yes, but still, large political parties tend to use social media specifically in the last period, at least, to target the exact audience that they tend to attract or to change their mind. We know about the scandals involving Cambridge Analytica and other campaigns. So this is a strategy that seems to be very attractive to political parties.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very attractive. And what we see is that political parties, increasingly campaign online. So if you look at the UK, for example, you don't really see political billboards anymore during a campaign. We have an election this year. No, you don't really see any billboards. And if you look at the amount that is spent on advertising, you're looking at 70 to 80% of the whole advertising budget is spent online. Partly that's because they're not allowed to spend money advertising on television. But it's, above and beyond anything else, they advertise online. And there's a good reason for that. It's cheaper. And as you say, you can target effectively if you like to. You can think about who your core audience is, and you can target that core audience to try and get out the vote. So if it's a cheaper way of doing it and a slightly more sophisticated way of doing it, you can see why political parties choose to do that over putting up a billboard, which is a relatively rudimentary way of targeting. You can think, well, this district is more likely to vote for this party for our party than another party, so I'll put the billboard there, or I'll put it on a motorway because lots of people are going to drive past. That's very rudimentary in the way that, something like advertising on Facebook, you can be a lot more sophisticated.
Yes, so you mentioned it's not allowed in the UK to advertise on TV stations in the electoral campaign. So can you explain a little bit more how do the election campaigns go in the UK? What are the main differences, for example, from here? As far as you know the details.
Yes, so the two main or the main differences that we have in the UK are, especially as compared with the vast majority of Europe, we don't really have much state financing at all. It's almost entirely privately financed. So you have sort of blocks of supporters that tend to finance the particular parties, and we have much fewer parties that are dominant in the system. Really, in the UK we have two main parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and then you have lots of smaller parties. That's slightly changing, but really you have these two main parties, and they get most of their funding from private sources. We have a small amount of state financing, but that is what we would call indirect state financing. So very rarely do you get money given to a party by the state. Through our opposition party, you get a little bit, but mainly it's provided through free mail delivery. So during an election, the government will pay for you to deliver some mail, and they will also give you because advertising is banned on TV, they will give you a slot. So, for example, on the BBC, after or just before the news, or after the news, in fact, you can have 5 minutes to make your pitch. They're so-called party political broadcasts, and that's about it, really. So in the UK, we have a system which is almost entirely privately financed, which is very different to the rest of Europe, and brings with it its own challenges. The main concern that we have in the UK is that these donations, big donations, buy some kind of influence in the means of policy that is made for those people that are donating above and beyond average people, if you will.
Okay, so let's go back to North Macedonia now. Do you have any recommendations for the system here when it comes to financing electoral campaigns? What could be changed? What can be improved?
So I think the primary things to think about in North Macedonia, firstly, is around the online portals. And first and foremost, and it might seem obvious, but there needs to be a decision made about who regulates those online portals. Because one thing that we know anywhere is that if you don't regulate something, there's going to be problems that appear there. I always like to think about money in politics is like water. Okay, it sort of flows uncontrollably, and you can put up dams and you can put up regulation, but it will flow around those dams to the place where there isn't one. And this is very much the case that you see in every country. And in North Macedonia, it is very likely that if you have an area which is unregulated, the online portals, that's where the money will flow. That's where either the money or the sort of misbehavior, if you will flow. And it's just sort of natural.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if it's not regulated, that's a problem. So a decision needs to be made somewhere about who is in charge of regulating this and regulating these online portals. The second thing is that with regards to state financing, the most important thing to think about when we finance politics through the state, and like I said at the start, there are very good reasons to finance politics through the state, is that it is done in an equitable way and that it is done in a fair way, such that people believe that their money is being spent well, citizens believe that their money is being spent well, and also that it doesn't unfairly benefit the established parties. Established parties will always be in charge of making some kind of decision about the formula because it's money coming from the state. But we know that state funding is more popular and more accepted and leads to a greater degree of democratic confidence when it is not seen as an establishment stitch-up. So what we can think about, I would say, in the North Macedonian system is have a look at the formula for the distribution of state financing, again, particularly as it relates to online portals and the media, which at the moment, comparatively, is overly beneficial to the main parties of both government and opposition, and not necessarily equitable in terms of the challenger parties or new parties getting a foothold in the system. What we want is diverse voices in democracy. We want people to get, even from minorities, to get their voices heard. And if the state is working against that, there's a good case to review, for example, the formula.
Thank you very much. This was the interview with Dr. Sem Power from the University of Bristol and an expert in election financing. Thank you.